All right, Josh, we are live and you are still in Vancouver, in the Vancouver office there. And today, what is our topic? What are we going to be talking about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about what happens when 4.9 million Canadian temporary visas expire. I think we all need a little bit of dose of truth on this because there's a lot of headlines from our political leaders, but I don't think any of them are actually dealing with the reality of the situation.
Yeah, what a
Uh,
horrible mess we are in. Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
and
Um, Go ahead.
ultimately, it's like we got to understand like how does this position Canada, for the viewers out there, how does this help you? How can you use this information, to make good decisions financially and build wealth still, despite the craziness that we're faced with. So I'm gonna jump into some links and stuff because it's pretty unbelievable. So you might want to strap in and take a look at some of these because when I say it, maybe it doesn't have the same requests, but
Yeah, give us some good visuals. Like let's really see what this is all about and how this is going to be affecting our economy for the next several years, if not decades. Let's check it out.
yeah. So I just sent you a request there, Trevor. If you just approve that, I can share my screen.
Absolutely.
Cool, cool. Okay, here we are. This is the Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, sorry. Feds expect 4.9 million with expiring visas to voluntarily leave Canada. 4.9 million to voluntarily leave Canada. So, let's step back and just look at some of these numbers because they're absolutely staggering. And if you take the budget will balance itself approach. I don't think it's going to work, and simply just repeating "bring it home, bring it home." I don't think that's going to work either. So then we got to get some real some real grip on the situation here. Okay, this is Stats Canada. This is where we were at the end of 2020 in terms of population. We had 38 million people in Canada. Okay, and now they have this handy. They have this handy counter on their website and they estimate the population in real time, and we're at 49.8 million. And let's call it that's going to hit 42 million. So, for all intents and purposes, 38 million to 42 million in the span of 4 years. So what do you get? 1 million people per year coming to Canada. Like
A
that's
million
a
people
million
per
people
year.
coming per year coming to Canada.
And how many houses are we building per year?
Oh, not a million.
Not a million.
Not even 500,000, not even close. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of what we have. You tie it back to some of these numbers that we start presenting. It's like I've been kind of pounding the drum on the job growth in Canada. You just look at the job growth in Canada. It's like, okay, we added, 600,000 600,000 public sector jobs in the last 5 years. Okay. And then we added, call it 900,000 private jobs. So, 1.5 million jobs. But wait, there's more. We lost 200,000 self-employed individuals. Okay. So you start looking at that. It's like maybe there's work for 1.3 million people, maybe. And the trend that I've discussed before is that the big change since 2019 is like the explosion of ride sharing and delivery services. And I see a bunch of numbers on that, but for all intents and purposes, I think I would estimate it at around 200,000 in that time period. So there's about 200,000, people who are, they're driving for Skip the Dishes or Uber, and so really, when you start to see this small business that it's down 200,000, it's probably down 400,000, because that they're not so. These aren't businesses that are going to create jobs, but okay, I guess they're working, right? And so most optimistically, you got 1.3 million. But now you take a step back, it's like you have 4 million people who came. 4 million people who came, and only 1.3 million of them have something to do. Okay. What's happening with the other 2.7 million. And, I start to get like the recent changes in the jobs, and we post this, quite often, where it's, we look at the full-time jobs and the unemployment rate. And I always tell people, like, unemployment rate at the best of times is a really difficult number to calculate, because you're attempting to establish who is looking for a job, which is, a subjective mechanism. It's not one that can be easily calculated. It just requires some estimation. So I prefer to look at the full-time job metrics, because I think it's a little more objective. You either have a full-time job or you don't. But you start like looking at this, it's like we had 16.7 million full-time jobs a year ago, and now we have 16.9. So, just that trend, here it is. It's like there's 1 million people coming every year, but there's only 200,000 jobs being created every year. And that's a troubling fact. And finally, the federal government has kind of wrapped their heads around that. But like, I need people to like really just understand how crazy it is. It's like, well, just deport them, just get rid of them. Let's just get them out of here, right? Okay, I'm gonna like break something down that might be like a little bit surprising. It's like, okay, let's go with 4.9 million people, just like high level math. 4.9 million people come to Canada, and I'm just going to focus on the most popular continent where people come from. They come from Asia. Okay, whether it's Southeast Asia or South Asia, they come from Asia. So it's approximately 62% of the people who come here are coming from Asia. Okay, so you have 4.9 million at 62%. You have about 3 million people coming from Asia. Okay, so to the people who say we're going to deport them, okay, let me break down the hilarity and the math of getting them out. Like, are they going to leave voluntarily? Okay, let's just say they're going to leave voluntarily. There's about 140 flights every week out of Canada going to Asia. About 140 flights per week. The long haul flights have that's a high end. It's about 120 to 140. Okay, every week, Canada to some Asian destination, whether it's the place that they came from. When you start to see, it's like a lot of the Asian flights, it's like they're going to go to hubs. You're going to go to South Korea. You're going to go to Japan. You're not necessarily going to go to Bangladesh or India direct from Canada. So because that's a little less frequency of that. So 140 flights going to some Asian destination. It has a capacity, those planes, of roughly 300. Okay, so you start to get a capacity, like the total flight capacity going out of Canada is about 42,000. Like you could move 42,000 people per week. Okay, that equates to 2.1 million, just shy of 2.2 million people. So in a year that you could theoretically, if the federal government nationalized every airline, both the ones who exist here domestically and the foreign-owned ones, so if they take them by military force and nationalize those planes, and they start banning all international travel from Canada to Asia, whether for business or pleasure, and use all of those planes exclusively to move people back to Asia and then deadhead the planes back to Canada, you would still only move 2.1 to 2.2 million people back to Asia. It's like, and we're talking about there's 3 million of those 4.9 people have to go back to Asia. It's like the hilarity in this math is like it is an unsolvable problem in the short term.
But our government says, oh, they're going to voluntarily go back to India or wherever they're from. Voluntarily. It's impossible for them to even do that because there aren't enough flights to make that happen. And if there aren't enough jobs, okay, for these people, because obviously by the stats and the numbers, there aren't enough jobs, where are they getting their money from? They're on government assistance. Am I wrong?
That's one area. Yes, government assistance is one area, and I believe the federal government is now seeking additional funding for this assistance. And in reality, you see the opposition is like, I haven't heard them articulate a plan on how to solve it. Like I know they're telling us there is a plan, which is an improvement than saying there is no problem. But there's really just the sheer mass of the problem. And so government assistance is one. The other problem that we see is any employer who is posting a job ad right now in Canada, the applicants that are showing up, an uncomfortable amount of the applicants that are showing up are people who are not legally allowed to work in Canada, but are trying to, get the employer to hire them illegally and willing to work under alternative arrangements. It's actually like a pretty cruel situation. And so, reputable players like myself, it's like, we're just not going to touch it. But then you get the ones who are willing to touch it are the not so reputable employers. And they're going to say, well, you're not legally entitled to work here, so maybe I'll pay you a wage that's lower than the legally required wage. It's like, this is the start of the craziness that we're seeing. And so when we're looking at these job numbers, it's like, it is really tough out there. It's like, you can see like the way, like the median hourly wage is like, for all intents and purposes, we've had zero growth in wage growth in 10 months. See, absolutely zero growth in wages in 10 months, right? And I think if you start extrapolating that out further, it's like you're going to see continued downward pressure on those wages. It's like, why? It's because some employers, they're not willing to pay that higher wage because they're going to hire someone potentially even illegally at a lower wage, and it's really messing with the labor numbers. So when you start to get these unemployment numbers, it's like, almost certainly they're higher because you have the same government who is saying that 4.9 million people are going to leave voluntarily, are supposedly reputable in their calculation of telling you how many people are actually looking for work in Canada. That's not going to work. I mean, the real math is like, there's 1 million people coming every year, and there's only 200,000 full-time jobs being created, and you have 80% that are unemployed, right? And who's really going to bear the brunt of this is probably younger workers from Canada, students that are graduating from post-secondary, they're graduating from high school, going out into the workforce, where they're trying to look for a summer job, and you can just see it with the youth employment numbers. And it's a real problem, right? And we talk about it in Canada, but if you start looking at the rest of the Western world, it's like, it's not an entirely unique problem to Canada, right? And you start having political leaders who, some of them are saying we don't even have a problem, it's fine, and some are saying we have a problem, but like, no one seems to be like actually crunching the numbers. It's like, oh, if you were going to deport them, how are you going to do this? How many agents are you going to hire? How are you going to transport them? Because the last time I looked, the swim from Vancouver to Japan, it's like a long swim. It's I don't think a lot of people.
I don't think they're going to make it.
They're not going to make it. Like, this isn't swimming the English Channel. Like you're not pushing them back across a land border.
Well, another option, let's just, play devil's advocate for a second. If we actually had a functioning military, I guess we could procure some of the CF-18s that we have and perhaps get some help from our neighbors to the south and get a bunch of people on CF-18s and ship them all back. But, then there would be people crying, oh, human rights, human rights. But we have a real problem here. Youth employment is a problem. Like my son, he's 20 years old and he's been trying to find work and to no avail.
Yeah.
And it's been really difficult. He's still a student, still going. He's trying to get some kind of work for himself to make a little bit of pocket money, which is what a first-time job is for. And as you go into all the small businesses, retail and fast food and other places like this, they are filled with foreign workers. And
Yeah.
that is a huge problem for Canadian-born citizens.
So the realistic outcome is there's going to be a significant amount of that population that is going to get absorbed. You start to see it in the fake asylum claims. And I say fake, like, why do I say fake? Because 80% of the people who claim asylum go back to vacation in the country that they claimed asylum from. Like, if you're really claiming asylum, you don't actually want to go back ever,
Yeah.
certainly not in the near future. So
Yeah.
the ones who are claiming asylum and then going back to vacation there, it's like, I'm sorry, that's a fake asylum, and that hurts someone's feelings. That's fine. There are real asylum cases, but not the ones who the destination from where you seek asylum is not the same place where you go to vacation.
Yeah.
That's
Don't go
just
back to visit family if you're claiming asylum.
yeah. So I mean that's um, you know a significant amount is going to get absorbed into the system. They are going to be renewing those visas or getting permanent residence. There's going to be people coming through the asylum route. They may have some people go back. You're probably going to have a lot of undocumented people that is going to mess with the numbers moving forward because they're just staying and working illegally. Like we can see it anecdotally, like anyone who's posting ads in Canada, like I said, it's an uncomfortable amount of people applying who are not legally allowed to work, who are willing to work despite that, right? And that is a problem. So we're really going to have to take these numbers with a grain of salt. I even start to question like the population numbers at this point on the way out. How are they tracking them on the way out? Are they just assuming they left when the visa expired? Because I think on the way up, the population number was pretty good because they were counting the application on the way in, but are they really like, is it a stamp at the border? I have my concerns if that number is going to be reliable on the way out. So I'm going to scrutinize any population counts from here on in because it's the same government who's saying that 4.9 people will leave voluntarily when there's actually really no practical way for them to leave, right? Even
Well,
if
I
they
mean,
wanted to.
another option, let's say we cut off all of the government funding for these people. They will kind of self-deport.
They won't.
They'll go somewhere else. They'll have to go
But
somewhere else.
here's the point.
Yeah.
They won't because there's not enough flights out of the country. Even it's like there's literally no way out. They're trapped, right?
So
Like
we've got
it's
Canadians living on the streets. We've got more homeless encampments everywhere, and we're still bringing in 1 million people per year. This is a big, big problem for Canada.
it's a big
Um,
problem, and so we really need to take that unemployment rate with a grain of salt. It's certainly higher. Just a question of how much higher. The better mechanism is looking at full-time jobs versus population growth from here moving forward, but also be discerning on the population counts moving forward. Like I'd probably really want to dig into that moving forward. But ultimately, like here's who benefits from that. Because we talk about who is a challenge, who benefits from that. The big corporations benefit from that. Okay. The utility companies of the world, they're still selling cell phones. The banks, these people still have accounts. They're getting credit cards. It's like the big name Canadian stocks do not care. Primarily, they're more concerned about GDP growth, not GDP per capita growth, right? And so you start looking at that, and that's it starts to make sense, right? And so you'll start to see it's like, well, why is the TSX not cratering? It's like, well, because the big companies who make up the TSX, they're actually benefiting from any growth, whether it's if the people are getting proportionally poor, that's not a problem as long as they have something to sell to the masses of those poor people, they're still extracting profit, right? And so that's a point where we have to understand that, and it's not unique to Canada. Like this is they all went to the same forum in Davos, and they all adopted this mass immigration, and they all brought in too many unskilled workers all at once. And so why am I still confident in holding Canadian assets? It's like ultimately, we're going to find that westernized countries have messed up their immigration, but some have resources to sell and some don't. That's what it's going to come down to, right? And so, how do you fix this in the UK? I don't know. You're on an island without a whole bunch of resources. How do you fix this in Canada? No problem. Build a couple of pipelines, create some $200,000 a year resource jobs. It's like the path is actually very clear. It's just a question on, when, when there's enough pain that the populace will give the powers that be the mandate to actually solve the problem.
And then don't forget the threat to the Canadian government. Get your border under control, or we're
Yeah,
going to have 25% tariffs on everything you sell us.
yeah,
That's kind of a big deal.
yeah,
And, it seems our government is not taking that seriously. I see there's some positive moves from the province of Alberta and from our premier and some of the other premiers in Canada. However, from the federal government, he just kind of sloughed it off. Like,
yeah.
no big
I mean,
deal.
I mean, there is only one way to actually negotiate with that. It's like, thank you very much. Like, we're going to do what we can. But then simultaneously, you start building the pipeline to Prince Rupert, you start building it to Churchill, and then you have a mechanism to sell your oil to somewhere else if you put the tariffs. And once you have the ability to turn off the taps, that balance of power shifts, right? People forget that there's more oil in northeastern Alberta than the entirety of the United States, right?
Yeah.
And so they need us, we need them now. We need them now. They need us for the future, right?
And
And
that's
then,
always been the problem with Canada, not knowing how to use leverage to negotiate. Basically, just have weak leaders who don't
yeah,
know how to negotiate and build from a position of strength, right?
yeah. And this stuff isn't like, to pump out the raw bitumen is like, that is not something that would take a decade. That is something that takes 2 to 4 years if someone really had a mandate to build out. Now, it takes a lot more to pump out refined products across the world. It's like that's a bigger, longer term project. But like, this is actually a project that one government could solve in one term and change the balance of negotiating power and simultaneously, change that GDP per capita that people keep thinking about. Because like, we have these people, there is actually no practical way to get rid of 4.9 million people all at once. It's going to be a slow burn project, and you're going to have to attack it from all angles. It's like, yeah, some of them should leave. You have to minimize the ones that are on support. Keep the productive ones. Have an effective filtration system. Have an enforcement system that, yeah, you do target the ones who are breaking the rules and not leaving. But we have to be realistic on how many we can actually, how many people we can actually exit at one time, and then how do we actually, because the goal is, we also don't want a population collapse either. It's like that. That's the goal too. So. We really have to think critically on how this happens, but ultimately the path is clear. It's just a question on, when there's enough pain that a government has a big enough mandate that they can actually solve it, because the solution is actually pretty clear.
Yeah, well, there'll be an election in October in Canada,
Yeah.
and the next incoming government is going to have to solve these problems. And it's going to take more than one term. It's going to take multiple terms to even start addressing these problems and the mess that has been made over the last 9 years. So, with that in mind, this problem of 4.9 people is going to be growing, and it'll probably take 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years for it to finally sort itself out. We have people who assimilate and become Canadians, and people who join our workforce and become productive members of Canada. We have the bad actors, leaving. And or being deported. So, this is a long-term issue. And then, if I can speak to Canadians, have more babies, like Elon Musk said, have more babies. And invest in stocks, because like Josh was saying, the big companies, the banks, the resource companies, phone companies, so forth, they're growing. Like they care that the GDP is growing, so more people buying more stuff in our country. Then if you are an owner of those stocks, you're going to benefit from those. So that's a silver lining, I guess, in this cloud. Do we have any other positive things that we can share with people before we sign off for today?
Yeah, I mean, it probably creates more uncertainty in the market that's necessary, because most people are very short-term thinking, right? And any long-term decision is like, I tell people, short term is a year, medium term is 1 to 10 years, long term is 10 years or more. And so in the medium term, there's going to be some craziness that happens in here. But in the long term, the solution is clear, and not a lot of other westernized countries actually have the solution because they don't have the get out of jail resource card. And that is the card that needs to get played, and eventually, with enough pain, enough people will come around to the solution. And so, someone with a long-term perspective, if they're actually making investments and decisions for 10 years or more, it starts to actually become very clear that you're actually in a good situation, and the craziness is benefiting you because it's throttling the prices of the desirable assets that you potentially want in this country. So,
All right. Well, is that everything for today? That's our main topic. That's what we wanted to deal with today.
yeah, that's it, Trevor. So I guess we'll get back on it next week, and probably might have some new job numbers by then. So.
All right. That sounds great. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Don't forget to get your tickets to the next boot camp. Go to spurrell.ca, spurrell.ca, click on the bootcamp tab, and then join us at our next boot camp. Beat the odds at business and wealth, and we'll see you then. Thanks so much.